and give us a chance to continue to resolve a number of the appropriation issues. It's important to remember that if we shut down the government, for those of us who are concerned about the border and want it to be improved, the Border Patrol and the ICE agencies have to continue to work for nothing. So I don't think, even for those of us who are deeply concerned about the border, I don't think that's likely, more likely to happen in a shutdown than with the government open. So the Senate and the House are quite different, as you know, and I think in the Senate we're going to continue to try to reach an agreement, pass it on a bipartisan basis, and hopefully keep the government open.
Last year, during consideration of the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a discussion about whether or not there would be increased audits of people making less than $400,000. Because you all recall, the Democrats appropriated or funded $80 billion for new IRS agents, 87,000 new IRS agents. And at the time, Republicans offered an amendment led by Senator Crapo that would have forced the IRS not to increase audits on people making less than $400,000 per year. Every single Democrat voted against that amendment. And now we find out through the IRS watchdog that the IRS is not going to be able to adhere to the pledge that they made to ensure that people making under $400,000 a year aren't subject to increased audits. Under the guise of agility, they need agility in order to reach their funding goals for the IRS. Well, this is exactly what we suggested was going to happen. That ultimately all that money, all those new IRS agents, we're going to start auditing people making less than $400,000 a year. And it's another byproduct of bidenomics. What have we gotten with bidenomics? We got increased audits, you got higher interest rates, crippling inflation, lower buying power, and depleted savings accounts. That's what we get with bidenomics. That's what the Inflation Reduction Act ultimately has yielded in terms of an outcome and a result, which many of us predicted. The work before us, obviously, this week, as the leader pointed out, is to try and make sure we get the government funded so that we can get a normal appropriations process going where we can have the big policy and funding debates that we should be having through normal appropriation bill debates, where not just members of the Appropriations Committee, but also of our entire caucus have an opportunity through the amendment process to have their voices heard.
Well, the government is on the verge of a shutdown, and the government is currently being operated using the bloated budget of Pelosi and Schumer and Biden from last year, with lots of wasteful Washington spending in it. The American people deserve better. They deserve a government that is open and that works for them. They deserve a government that is open and a border that is closed, which is why Republicans will be working on amendments on what we're dealing with on the floor now that will stop the flow of illegal immigrants coming into this country and stop the flow of illegal drugs that are doing so much damage to the people of this country. But the public deserves a Congress that provides a check on this out-of-control administration and the agenda that's coming out of the Biden administration. The way to do that is to pass 12 appropriations bills. We have a responsibility to do that. And that's why I'm such a proponent of the Prevent Government Shutdowns Act. I've continually co-sponsored this every time over the last 3 Congresses. Simply speaking, this holds the public harmless. And it holds Washington here, Republicans, Democrats, House and Senate here, working day after day, 7 days a week, to get all the appropriation bills done, and they can work on nothing else until that happens. This is set up to put the pressure and the punishment on the politicians, not on the public. We need to pass the Prevent Government Shutdowns Act. We need to do it now. That's the way to prevent government shutdowns permanently.
Well, harvest is in full swing back home in Iowa, and On Monday, as I was driving up to the airport, I go through all of these wonderful communities lined with soybean fields, corn fields, and some of the fondest memories that I have as a little girl in Southwest Iowa was always riding in the tractor or the combine with my dad or my uncle or my grandpa. And, you know, Iowans are working really, really hard. And it's such a different position than what we see here in Washington, D.C., where yet once again, Congress as a body is not able to get its work done. And I think folks here in Washington could really learn a lot from our hardworking Iowans. And so this last Friday, I tried something new, and I brought a lot of these Washington, D.C. agencies out to Iowa for my first ever Entrepreneur Expo, where we connected small businesses and individuals from the great state of Iowa with those in government agencies to learn about contracting opportunities. We really want to develop our small businesses in Iowa and again, give them the shot at providing government, our federal government, with their next best idea.
Well, we saw the startling numbers, I think, from the August immigration. I talked about that illegal immigration. I talked about that last week. But this week, I also realized as I went to see what's called the Martinsburg Initiative in Martinsburg, West Virginia, where it's an all-hands-on-deck preventative initiative to fight addiction and the addiction crisis. The numbers that were released, 111,000 Americans lost their lives to fentanyl overdoses last year. My state of West Virginia, per population, unfortunately leads that statistics, and our statistics went up 4.5% in terms of the number of lives that we lost. So as we look at this potential for a government shutdown, if we look at the alarming numbers at the border, what we're faced with is what the leader says. We're faced with asking our Border Patrol agents who are totally overrun, we're asking them to do more now, but now we could be asking them, or they could be asked to work and not receive a paycheck. And so what happens? What happens to all these fentanyl deaths and the fentanyl coming over when we have a workforce that's overstretched and has to stop 224,000 illegals coming through? The drugs flood through and kill our Americans and our young people and our sons and daughters. And it's just a human crisis that we have here. So we got to keep the government running. We've got to pay and figure out a way to enforce the border. I think it would be a great place to put it on a CR to have more border protection. I'm absolutely for that. But at this point right now, 77% of the American people do not believe we should shut the government down, and I'm in that 77%. And I think it will have great impacts not only on the border, but also on those who are suffering from addiction and having issues with the flow of fentanyl that are coming across our border. Thank you.
Joe Biden is a record-breaking president. Record high inflation, record high gas prices, record high illegal border crossings. In this administration, who, quote, brought back transparency, conveniently disclosed the August border numbers in a Friday evening news dump when they thought nobody was paying attention. And I can see why they wanted the American people to miss this. New numbers showing that President Biden's southern border crisis just keeps breaking records. It's getting worse and worse. August alone saw a record at nearly 250,000 illegal crossings. Since Biden took office, there's been a record nearly 8 million crossings. That's equivalent to adding 3 Chicagos of illegal immigrants to our country in less than 3 years. It's out of control since day one. Biden ended construction on the border wall, ended the Remain in Mexico policy, and then ended Title 42. And we, as the American people, have been paying the price ever since. Fentanyl, crime. Every state now is a border state. We had more than 100,000 drug overdose deaths in 2022. Yes, another record. Another record was set as well. Record low approval ratings for President Biden that just came out on his handling of the southern border. It's time for Joe Biden to stop breaking records, start securing our southern borders. Mr. President, shut down the border. Don't shut down the government.
Leader McConnell.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell.
Can you characterize your disagreement with Speaker McCarthy over the Senate bill on the government, and should this not have been pre-baked if there's that much resistance on the House side of the bill?
Well, you know, for over 200 years, the Senate and the House have been very different. What we're focusing on here in the Senate is to try to keep the government open, to try to continue to pay the people who are essential to our security, like air traffic controllers, border patrol, Capitol Police, because the Constitution requires that we continue to be paid during a shutdown. It's completely unfair to the American people. So, look, I don't want to give the Speaker any advice about how to run the House, particularly through you, and we're going to concentrate on trying to do our job here in the Senate, which I think is to pass a bill that keeps the government open. And I can't have an impact on what happens in the House. Alex?
What should the Senate do about Bob Menendez? Should he have access to classified information in the SCIF? Should he resign? Should he be expelled?
I think that's an issue for the Democrats to deal with.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell.
Regarding a possible government shutdown, would you be willing to strip Ukraine aid out of the package in order to make sure that it got a vote in the House of Representatives?
I'm comfortable with the way we've put together the Senate bill. It basically is trying to do just continuation until November the 17th. I think this crafted package is a result of a lot of discussion. I think it makes sense for the Senate. I also think it makes sense for the country, and that's what I intend to support.
Leader McConnell, would you support a clean CR without Ukraine funding?